So are we? It is Thursday, the 24th of September 2020. We're broadcasting live, and this is the licensing subcommittee of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, meeting to consider the application by Orchestra Restaurant Limited for a variation of the premises licence in respect of 170 Earls Court Road. Before I do the introductions, I think I need to ask. Just set some ground rules for doing things online. Could you please mute your microphones unless you've got a speaking role, because we're getting background noise already. And please only turn your cameras on when you've got a speaking role, because that saves the bandwidth. And the other ground rule is that the chat function is not monitored, so please don't use the chat function on Microsoft Teams. So my name is Greg Hammond. I'm Councillor for Courtfield Ward, which is immediately to the east of Earls Court Road. I'm a Vice Chair of the Licensing Committee. I'm very familiar with Earls Court Road, but not the establishment, and I have no declarations of interest. And I'll now ask the other members of the subcommittee today to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Mills, please.
Good morning, Councillor Mills, Julie Mills, Norland Ward. No conflicts, no declarations of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Blakeman.
Councillor Blakeman, Nottingdale Ward in North Kensington. No interest to declare.
Thanks very much. And we three are the decision makers in this case, but we're assisted by a number of officers, starting with our legal officer.
Good morning. This is Lindsay Lamasurier.
Thank you. And we have a licensing officer. Actually, I think we have two licensing officers today, so please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Chair. Paul Phelan, licensing, present.
And Laura McGann, licensing, present.
Thanks very much. We also have another number of administrative officers helping with the case. I won't ask them to speak to introduce themselves at the moment. There's Anne Wright, Yasmin Yama, Leonie Hill and Esme Shari. We have some of the responsible authorities are present today, so if I could ask the police licensing officer to introduce himself, please.
Yep, PC and Davis present.
Thanks very much. Noise and nuisance.
Hi there. Yes, good morning. Philip Richardson from the Noise and Nuisance team.
I'm not expecting any other responsible authorities. We have our applicant. Good morning, Mr. Shawani. Can you hear me? Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Shawani? We won't be going very far without the applicant as he dropped out.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, it seems he has dropped out, so I'm just going to try and contact him. If we just.
All right, we'll pause the hearing at that point, and we may have to go back to the beginning depending on what he heard or didn't hear. and just say that we are broadcasting live on Thursday, the 24th of September 2020. The case is the application by Orchestra Restaurant Limited for a variation of the premises licence in respect to 170 Earls Court Road, and we are the licensing subcommittee of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. My name's Greg Hammond. I'm councillor for Courtfield Ward, immediately to the east of Earls Court. I'm very familiar with Earls Court Road, but have no interest to declare. And I'll now bring my fellow panellists on to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Mills, please.
Councillor Julie Mills, Norland Ward, no declarations of interest or conflict. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Blakeman.
Councillor Blakeman, Nottingdale Ward, with no declarations of interest.
Thank you. And we three are the decision makers in the case, but we have a number of officers assisting us, starting with the legal officer.
Good morning. This is Lindsay Limazzurio, legal officer for today's meeting.
Thank you. And we have two licensing officers today.
Good morning, Chair. This is Paul Phelan, licensing officer.
Good morning, this is Laura McGann, licensing officer.
Thank you. And we have a number of committee officers, Anne Wright, Yasmin Jama, Leonie Hill and Esme Shari. I won't ask them to speak. The responsible authorities are present, at least two of them are, so the police licensing officer.
PC and Davis, licensing. Good morning.
Good morning. Again, thank you. And noise and nuisance.
Yes, good morning. Philip Richardson from Noise and Nuisance.
Thanks very much. And well, Mr. Shawami, we've established that we can hear each other, and we have one registered objector, which is Councillor Malcolm Spalding. If you'd like to come on, please.
Good morning, Chairman. I'll be speaking on behalf of the Earls Court Society and on behalf of the three ward councillors who are all objectors in this case.
Thanks very much, Councillor Spalding. And the ground rules for online, which Mr. Shawani didn't hear first time round, is please only unmute your microphones when called to speak to prevent any background noise. And please turn your cameras off to save bandwidth when you're not speaking, and there's no need to use the chat function because it isn't monitored. By way of a document check, we only have one document, which is the main committee bundle consisting of 79 pages. All the committee members have read that, so there's no need to repeat any of the points within it, but please do feel free to draw our attention to any specific points that help you make your case. Because of the limits of technology and the quorum for this meeting, the decision quorum is 2 councillors. We can continue the meeting if I happen to drop out and can't get back in quickly. So we do need a substitute chair. So I'm nominating Councillor Mills as the substitute chair. Is that seconded, Councillor Blakeman?
Yes, seconded.
And accepted.
And agreed. So we have a substitute chair just in case I drop out permanently. So the procedure for the meeting will be, I'll in a moment ask one of the licensing officers to outline the case, and then it will be for Mr. Shawani up to 10 minutes to present your case to us, and then there'll be a question session starting with the members, the legal officer, the responsible authorities and the objector. We'll then hear from each of the responsible authorities in turn, followed by a question session. And then the objector will be allowed up to 10 minutes to present his case, followed by another question session. We'll hear some advice from the legal officer. There will not be a summing up today, and then the panel will retire to make the decision. So before we start, are there any other preliminary matters from any parties? I'll just pause for a moment to allow anybody to come on. And there are not. So if I may invite Mr. Phelan to present an outline of the case, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Today's application is made by Orchestra Restaurants Limited for the variation of a premises licence at Jimmy's Grill, 170 Earls Court Road, London, SW5 9QQ. The initial hearing for this variation was scheduled for the 26th of March 2020, but was adjourned due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The application before you today seeks to extend both the opening hours and terminal hours for the provision of late night refreshment to 3 a.m. Monday to Sunday, both indoors and outdoors. The current licence permits late night refreshment indoors until midnight. No additional steps have been proposed at this stage to further promote the licensing objectives. 15 representations have been received which oppose this application. This includes objections from the Earls Court Ward Councillors and one from the Earls Court Village Residents Association. A summary of their representations can be found on pages 4 to 5, with copies attached to Appendix E on pages 35 to 49. This application has also attracted representations from both the Metropolitan Police and the Council's noise team. A summary of their representations can be found on pages 2 to 4, with copies attached to Appendix C, pages 26 to 29, and Appendix D, pages 30 to 34 respectively. Council records indicate that no complaints or temporary event notices were received in the preceding 12 months. That concludes the summary of this application. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Sherwani, it's now your opportunity to present your case to us, and if you'd like to come online so we can see you, put your camera on.
Can you see me?
I can hear you certainly. And there you are. I can see you as well. So I'll give you up to 10 minutes now to present your application to the committee. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. This is an application to vary the premises licence under Section 34 of the Licensing Act 2003. At the moment, the premises has a licence which was dated the 9th of December 2019. And on pages 8 and 9 of the bundle, you'll see the provision for late night refreshment was given from 2300 hours to 2400 hours, and the sale and supply of alcohol both on and off the premises. We informed the council on the 11th of February 2020 and the respective parties that we would not be selling or supplying alcohol from the premises from the 11th of February 2020. On the 4th of February 2020, we informed the council that the property, which was formerly 172 to 170 Earls Court, was now divided into two premises, so that half of the premises would be a restaurant and takeaway, and the other half a health and beauty salon. And that division has now taken place, and we've received permission from the council to run the premises on the other side as a health and beauty outlet. So we made certain suggestions at the very beginning of the application that we would stop the playing of recorded music, and we would have no live music from the premises from February 2020. The aim basically was that we found that because of the downturn in business, that we had to make some drastic measures in this business to make it a viable business in this particular case. So when we appeared before you in 2019 for our first application for a new premises license, we received many objections relating to the main licensing objective of the prevention of nuisance. And as a result of those many objections, the council quite rightly presented and agreed various conditions, which are conditions 17 to 25 on the license. These are on page 15 of the bundle. And I'll just quickly go through them if it's fine with you guys. First of all, condition 17. Legible notices shall be displayed on all exits. Condition 18, rubbish, including bottles and cans, shall not be deposited outside the premises. Condition 20, no noise or vibration associated with the operation of plant at the premises shall give rise to a nuisance. Condition 21, no music or amplified sound shall be generated within the premises, which would give rise to nuisance to neighbouring dwellings. And condition 22, which was no smells generated from cooking processes at the premises shall give rise to nuisance. And condition 25, external doors and windows at the rear of the premises shall be kept closed between 9:30 p.m. and 0800 hours the following day. Now, when those conditions were imposed, we agreed to those conditions and so far have observed those conditions religiously so that we don't have any issues concerning nuisance, because we do realise there are local residents in the area and they deserve to have peace and quiet late at night. So much so that the premises above the restaurant have never ever been let out to tenants in case they would open windows and doors from the premises. So we've been quite responsible in that respect. So on page 3 of the interim report, you'll see that the police have not had any significant offences or incidences linked with these premises in the last 18 months. Page 5, you'll see from the report that no noise complaints have been received in the preceding 12 months. And there are limits to which we can go to in terms of trading. So in determining your decision today, I tried to contact the police by email, and they quite rightly responded and said that this is a matter that should go before the licensing subcommittee, who could alleviate any concerns raised by the relevant representations by imposing terms and conditions which are reasonable. Mr. Philip Richardson, the Senior Officer for Noise and Nuisance, has offered 3 conditions on pages 3 and 4 of the report relating to litter patrols, day and night, and delivery policies to deal with motorcyclists, drivers and couriers that needed to be in place within 21 days. We are happy to comply with those conditions from Mr. Philip Richardson. There are a few late night food outlets in the vicinity, such as in Kenway Road, which have a commercial advantage. But can I say at this stage that many of the objectors, and there were many back in 2019, are in fact most of the objectors who have objected today. For example, Duncan Jeffries, Suzanne Drew, Elizabeth Harrop, Councillor Wade, Mrs. Philip Seaburn, they were the same objectors who object in that time. And I think circumstances have moved on. We're living in unprecedented times with the pandemic, which will affect jobs and the viability of local businesses. And no one wants to see any empty shops or any empty restaurants in the area. So we've adapted our business by downscaling, by trying to improve our takeaway business because of the pandemic, and by trying to attract customers from further afield by dropping for food outlets through Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eats. The premises are not in the East Village conservation area, and according to Michael Robertson, there's no conflict between the planning history of the site and what we are proposing today. So we have tried to consider the type of business we have got at the moment, and we are getting a lot of customers from the NHS hospital close by who often work very late at night and have asked us to see if we could open a bit later. Turning to the issue of the conditions which have been implemented, so far we have closed all windows. We have made sure that we don't have any noise or disturbance, unreasonable loud music early at night, and we have tried to avoid any enforcement action, which may be difficult to take in these circumstances. And I do understand that local risk assessments and licensing policies have to be considered. And the authority has to consider that we are very close to an area where there's a residential population with children and families. And we've tried to be responsible by making sure that waste and bottles have been removed from the premises and that there's been no loitering outside the premises. Turning to the issue of couriers, motorcyclists and drivers, we have 3 contracts with Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eats, and all of these companies have employees who have signed contracts to observe their delivery policies. For example, not loitering, not creating noise, not revving motorcycles and cars. And that is a contract between the Deliveroo, Uber Eats and etc. and their employees. And there's very little that we can do to tell them what to do apart from contacting the delivery service and say, please make sure that your drivers undertake to make less noise, create less issues. And there haven't been any issues in the last 12 months as far as I can see, because nobody has made any complaints. Drivers have to be insured. Vehicles have to make sure that they've got MOTs, and drivers have to be trained by these delivery companies. So they have gone through a training process. And I've been told by others that many drivers are foreign drivers and they don't observe many of these rules and regulations. And it's unreasonable in many cases. But we will undertake to do whatever we can to make sure that the noise is kept to a minimum.
Mr. Shawani, hesitate to interrupt you in mid-flow, but 10 minutes goes very quickly when you're in mid-flow. Are you fairly close to drawing to a conclusion?
I've just got 2 more little points to make, if that's possible, Chair.
I will give you time to make those, but I will give extra time to the objector to make his case. So you have another couple of minutes.
Thank you very much. There are 2 premises in the area, Star Kebab House, which is open until 0200 hours, Monday to Sunday, with a late night refreshment license, and Giorgio's Pizzas, which is open until 0200 hours. And there are others which are open until 0 to 300 hours, Zizi's, Eastern Tavern, Masala Zone, etc. Chair, can I apologise to all the parties who are here today? We have made a tremendous mistake by not consulting with any of the respective responsible authorities, and I apologise for that. Secondly, the time that is requested on the application of 0 to 300 hours is totally unreasonable when I saw the reports of all the other premises holders. And we would be happy to accept maybe 1 o'clock or maybe 2 o'clock, as in the Star Kebab House, if conditions and terms were agreed. But 0300 is totally unreasonable. And as I say, we are unhappy that we put that in the application. And that is the end of my submission, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shawani. I'm now going to turn to my colleagues on the panel to ask questions. So, Councillor Mills, if you'd like to go first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A few, if I may. First of all, to check that you can hear me, Mr. Shawani.
I can hear you, madam.
Thank you. You will be. I don't understand if you find the terminal hour 3 o'clock to have been so unreasonable, why you didn't amend your application to, as you put it, a more sensible hour. But putting that aside, if I may go through my own misgivings on the application, the borough has something called a midnight policy. It's in your papers and it's at paragraph 8 to 11 on page 67. And it clearly says that the licensing authority will generally expect licensable activities, this is at the end of para 1, to cease sufficiently before midnight to ensure the licensing objectives are carried out. So why is your establishment an exception? Maybe if I did my 3 questions and you could come back to them, if that's easier, Mr. Shawani. So what is it that's so exceptional about your premises that would make us go against something that has been fully consulted on and it forms a part of our policy since the Licensing Act actually came into place some 10 to 15 years ago? So that's question number 1. You say that you want these extra hours because your business is suffering, absolutely understandable in these COVID days. Does that therefore mean that what you're going to rely on is much more delivery business because of the curfews that are going to be or that are in place, which means then that we will be seeing an increase in your business between 12 o'clock or 11:30 and 3 o'clock of deliveries, including, as you have just said, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, and the other ones who don't always obey their own delivery policies? And number 3, if I may, tell us about Orchestra Limited. I took the liberty, if you don't mind, of looking up the company at Companies House, and I noticed that there's a Mr. Eid Hassan who is the owner. Is he the owner?
So let me just go back to your questions. On the 3rd question, the Orchestra restaurant is a limited company. They have one director, Eid Hassan, who is the owner of the premises. He's also a personal license holder, has got a card with the Kensington and Borough Council. As regards to why we think it's an exceptional case, well, the reason why we think it's a little more exceptional is because we are not selling any alcohol. We've decided to stop. We're not playing any music. We're not having any recorded music. And also, in view of the pandemic that started back in February, March, we thought that we would have to make an application very early on to make changes to our business to deal with the pandemic that was coming. It was a bit foresight, really. We thought it was the right approach in January 2020, bearing in mind what was happening very early, that we would be the first people to start making changes to our business to deal with the pandemic early on. It's just a structural change that we thought would actually help our business improve and try to deal with the whole issue. So as far as the exceptional circumstances, those are the 3 issues that we've highlighted. With regard to the delivery side of things you've mentioned, we will strongly contact all of our delivery companies and make sure that they know about our delivery policy. And that policy will be approved by the council. And we will tell all drivers, as soon as they come to our premises, to observe these rules and observe these regulations as tightly as they possibly can. And we can do no more than that. We will try to enforce it as much as we can with our delivery service. But essentially, you're absolutely right. We've gone from becoming a restaurant to becoming a takeaway delivery service at the moment. I hope that answers your question, madam.
It does. With the leave of the chairman, may I ask one clarification point, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Which is, so can you explain why, I mean, you'd be familiar, Mr. Shawani, being the applicant here today, and I'm guessing the license holder yourself, with the inability sometimes of the licensing authority, if there are difficulties with staff or with the breaking of some of the licensing laws, that you can't get hold of the owner of the premises. Can I ask why Mr. Hassan or Mr. Hussain, I'm sorry, I'm not sure which way to pronounce it. Why isn't he here today to assure the committee that he has got training in place, that he has got procedures in place, that he has got delivery policies in place that would mitigate the licensing objectives? And number 2, why is your business case an exception during COVID times? As I see it, there are about 31 premises listed on our papers, of which about 4 all takeaways have a late night license only till 2 o'clock. So why would your business and the success of it, and of course we all wish your business a great success, but why is it more exceptional than the amenity of the residents and their rights not to be disturbed? You've seen the papers, there's people eating takeaway food in side streets, there are the noises of the delivery vans and all the rest of it. I mean, why is your business sort of more exceptional to secure than you're consulting with them and their own rights in the present situation, especially on the Earls Court Road?
Well, first of all, Mr. Hassan isn't here. He left the matter for me to deal with, but he is at the restaurant today and he's available on the phone. I didn't realise he needed to be here, but he certainly didn't attend the first application, which was in 2019 either. Secondly, with regard to the exceptional points of view, can I say that this is a very difficult judgment the subcommittee have to reach. It's a balance that has to be made between commercial enterprise and the needs and the requirements of the local residents. And would you believe it, I'm more in favour of the local residents because I have children and I have a family, and I sometimes get people driving past my house and driving with loud music at night, and I absolutely find it abhorrent. So there is no other exceptional reason that we can give you in terms of why should we get that specific license in addition to the others that have already got it or haven't got it. But it's the judgment that you have to make based on your experience and knowledge of the area, local knowledge, local experiences, and your knowledge of local people. From my own experience, I can say that as business people, we are trying to be as responsible and as legal and in every terms of the way that we can do to try to make sure that our business survives during these tough pandemic periods. That is the only reason why we made this application in January, because we knew things were going to get worse in the summer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shawani, for your honesty and candour. That's very, very refreshing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mills. Councillor Blakeman.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, madam.
Yeah. Firstly, what sort of food do you serve via your takeaways? And secondly, you said that health workers had asked for an extension to your hours. Do you know how many and from which healthcare providers they came?
What we serve is mainly Lebanese food, which is grilled food. And nowadays the trend is to eat more grilled food than fried food because of health concerns. But the local hospitals, Cromwell Road especially, we do a lot of deliveries to nurses and doctors and other workers in that hospital, and they work late at night, and they also travel late at nights to and from the hospital. And it's those people who contacted us in January and said we would actually order more food at night times because we're doing 12-hour shifts and we need to see if we can find an outlet which we like. In terms of numbers, it's very difficult for us to say, but it was just the general demand we had from that particular area.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Shawani.
Thanks very much. Mr. Shawani, I just have one, which was to confirm the conditions. You said you were happy with the conditions, and are they the ones laid out on page 4 of the case bundle?
That's correct. But can I also add that I did contact the Metropolitan Police, and if they have any additional conditions or any other terms, we will be happy to comply with those terms and conditions. We want to try to work with the responsible authorities as much as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the panel questions. I'll turn to Ms. Mazurier to see if she's got any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't got any questions at this time. I'll wait till just before you close to go through any possible conditions.
Of course, yes.
Mr. Chairman, sorry,
yes,
following on from what's been said, may I ask just one last question of Mr.
Please
Shawani? Mr. Shawani, you didn't deal with the point as to why you didn't amend your application, and I was rather startled to hear that you were well aware in 2019 on the first application of how many objections there were and how many concerns there were in the area. And I just wondered why you hadn't on this occasion. Now, you said you tried after the application to get in touch with the police. Why you didn't think that you should consult the local residents associations, the councillors, the police or the licensing authority with their pre-app advice prior to submitting what would normally be an extension for very, very long hours now? Why didn't you consult locally and amend your application?
The simple answer is that was a grave error on my part. I should have, and now I look at it, I should have contacted all the responsible authorities to say, what would you do? But we were going through a lot of difficulties with changing the restaurant, where we put the kitchen in the basement. We divided the property into two. We had an application going through for the health and the beauty salon with the council. There was a lot going on for us, and the changes in the commercial conditions, it was a complete error on my part, and I apologise for that error.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Mills. I'm now going to turn to the responsible authorities and the objector to ask questions, and I know you're all experienced hands at this, and this is, I don't really need to remind you, this is not the opportunity for you to make your cases, but it's to ask Mr. Shawani questions about his application. So starting with Constable Davis, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just two questions. In clarification, Mr. Shawani, you mentioned that you're prepared to reduce the hours. Is it 1 o'clock or is it 2 o'clock in the morning?
Well, 1 o'clock would be fine. 2 o'clock would be fine. We are in your hands. Whatever you feel is acceptable, we will observe those recommendations.
Okay. And further, you mentioned you'd been in contact with the NHS in relation to support. Have you got any verified emails or statements of support from NHS workers or to support your case and your position?
We haven't got any paperwork, unfortunately. It's just that when we do the deliveries there, they keep mentioning it to us that we would have loved it if you could deliver at 1 o'clock when we're just coming off our first shift or whatever. But it's just the feedback that we get from our customers that they're saying that we would like to order more and more from you if you could actually open later. That's the only reason why the application actually went in.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. That's all my questions.
Thanks very much, Constable. Mr. Richardson, any questions from you?
Good morning. Yes, the only question I would have was similar to PC Davis's, was there some clarification on whether it would be 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock for the revised hours, that's all. Whether or not Mr. Shawani is going to let that decision be made by the committee or not, but just a clarification on, is it 1 or is it 2?
I would really like the committee to make a decision on this, because I think they have a more feel about what's going on in the community, and they know their residents and their local people, and I feel they know what the right balance is. I am coming from a business point of view, and that may not be the right point of view to look at. That's why I feel I'll be much better in your judgment than in our commercial judgment, because obviously we want the business to survive and do well, but we think we've got to have a balance here.
Thanks, Mr. Richardson. Any other questions from you?
No further questions from me, thanks.
Thanks very much. So, Councillor Spalding, do you have any questions for Mr. Shawani?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 6 questions, if I may, and if Mr. Shawani could answer each question as we take them one by one. Thank you. So I'm asking these questions on behalf of the Earls Court Society, which is actually purely comprised of the chairman of all 15 local residents associations. And I'm also asking as ward councillor, representing my 2 fellow ward councillors. First of all, Mr. Shawani, you said the local community is essential to this, and the entitlement to a quiet life and so on. So can I ask, since you made such a big point of that, why didn't you consult with any of these residents? You did say that about 5 of them had objected before in 2019.
I remember, sorry, sir. I remember writing to Duncan Jeffrey, for example, on the 21st of September 2018, and to Mrs. Wade about the first application. I can only apologise. I did not consult. It was an error on my part, and I should have done. It was something now I really consider that it was an important part of it, because local residents would all have views about this. But I should have contacted the Metropolitan Police specifically and the noise officer in charge. I can only apologise to the committee for that.
Okay, and then just a couple of questions related to that. You referred to something called the East Village.
Yes.
Would that be Mrs. Philippa Seabohm, who is chairman of Earls Court Village Residents Association, who are objectors?
I was just looking at the conservation area on the map, really, to see whether it was within the conservation area of East Village.
Earls Court Village?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. This last question relates to your local knowledge. You said it was all the same objectors.
Well, mainly the same objectors.
Would you accept, actually only 5 of them had objected before, and so the majority of objectors to 3 AM, the majority of them are actually new objectors?
I would accept that completely.
Thank you. Then just a couple of other quick questions. If you're expecting the business to improve as a restaurant, why did you halve the space and reduce it to just a narrow counter with 3 tables?
No, we expected the restaurant to have less business. In January, February time, we expected the business to go completely down. So that's why we divided the premises, leased out half of it to the health and beauty salon, and thought this restaurant business is not going to survive because customers won't be coming to restaurants. And so we thought we'd put more emphasis on doing takeaways. It was to preempt what was going to happen for the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thanks. Last 2 questions. When you refer to an NHS hospital nearby, is that the Chelsea Westminster? And if so, how do those nurses and doctors, do they come to you, or do you deliver to Chelsea Westminster?
No, what happens is they contact us and we then do a delivery to the hospital. And that's mainly to nurses and porters and staff of that nature, because they, for some reason, they like grilled food. And because of that demand we had, we thought this would be probably a good idea to improve on our takeaway business to the hospital. And it's working at the moment very well for us.
So is that the Chelsea Westminster Hospital, or
Yes.
is it the very small private Cromwell Hospital?
It's both hospitals that we are getting calls from for takeaway orders. And in fact, now I think of it, it would have been a very good idea, which I think a previous objector or councillor mentioned, that we should have got some evidence from the NHS workers to substantiate that particular specific point.
And last question, the Orchestra Restaurant Group Limited has come into this. Are you aware of problems with the Orchestra restaurants?
There are no
problems. Management of crowds of people on the pavements in Knightsbridge.
We have no problems with the Orchestra restaurant. We've had no complaints. We try to observe regulations and laws as much as possible. We've had no issues at all, actually.
I only mention that because it's a matter of record that it did come up and it has been recorded in previous licensing hearings.
In what respect?
On the pavement. Maybe you're not aware of it. Yeah,
I'm not aware of any such, and if I was, I'd be telling you exactly what happened. But I'm not aware of any instances at all. Yeah.
Okay.
The issue of loitering is actually a moot point, because if you say that people who are drunks will loiter outside the premises, well, they all know we don't sell alcohol. We haven't been selling alcohol since January, so they know it's not a place to go to buy alcohol. So it wouldn't really arise since January, but before January, I'm not aware of any instances at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Spalding. I'm just going to pause for a moment to see if either Councillor Mills or Councillor Blakeman, my colleagues on the panel, wish to come back with any follow-up questions. And Councillor Mills.
No, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. In which case, Mr. Shawani, thank you very much for presenting your case and answering the questions. You can now turn your camera off. You will get an opportunity to ask questions of other parties when they've presented their evidence. But thank you very much for making your case.
You want me to turn the audio off as well?
Yeah, turn your microphone and your camera off until you're called to ask questions, should you wish to, in the next stages. So I'm now going to turn to the responsible authorities in turn. So we'll start with Constable Davis, and you now have 12 minutes, should you wish to make your case, followed by questions.
Thank you much, Chair. There's not much more I can kind of add to the police position, other than obviously the recent update in legislation, which may impact on the committee's decision, whereby as of today, there's going to be a 6-month, as a minimum, ruling of a curfew from between 2200 hours to 0500 hours, which is going to push more kind of off sales and takeaway services, which could be a concern in relation to the operation of this business. So reading in between the lines, I think the position will be it's likely to be even busier for Deliveroo, etc., in these sorts of businesses, which could greatly impact the nuisance aspect. Taking on board Mr. Shawani's concerns about managing Deliveroo. Obviously, the licensable activities of Deliveroo aren't manageable because they're an agent per se. So hence, that is the concern that would be in relation to this application. And just basically to sum up the position is that it is still felt and it still remains that the premises is operating at a premium and be guided by the midnight policy. There's no further crime and disorder or nuisance complaints in relation to the operation of the business. However, as been stated in unprecedented times, the dynamics of late night activities has changed dramatically. And that is my submission, Chair.
Thanks very much, Constable. I'll just turn to my colleagues now to invite them to ask questions, starting with Councillor Mills, please. So, Councillor Mills, are you with us still? I think we'll just have to do a pause. Councillor Mills was having a few technical problems before the hearing.
Sorry, Chair, it's Leonie Hill. Councillor Mills is in the meeting. It's just she appears to be on mute. So if you just unmute yourself, Councillor Mills, and then we'll be able to hear you.
Councillor Mills may have just dropped out of the meeting.
Yes, Chair, she just did. So I'm just going to contact her. So if we just.
All right, we'll pause at that point, and then we may. Well, we don't know how much she heard of Constable Davis's submission, so we may possibly have to go back over that again. Leonie, I wonder if we could have an update, please. I can see Councillor Mills has appeared back in the meeting.
Yeah, I've come in on, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman
That's all right.
and hearing, I've come in on my personal iPad because for some reason the councillor link seems to be being blocked. So I'm with you now.
Okay, well, we need to know where you got to before you were dumped out.
Yes, please. I heard all of Councillor Davies,
Constable Davies.
Officer Davies' remarks and the answers to that. So
we just got. I was just going to. I just turned to you to ask if you had any questions, Councillor Mills, at this stage for Constable Davies. So.
Yes, please.
Over to yes, please do.
Having heard, as I say, I do apologise. I don't know if anything came after that.
Didn't.
Everything that Officer Davies had to say. Officer Davies and indeed Councillor Spalding were good enough to mention the impact on business in these unprecedented times, and I wondered how they felt that the committee should view this balance of trying to help businesses out who are going to become much more takeaway oriented, as I think the officer said, versus the impact on local residents. And perhaps that's a question for both Councillor Spalding and Officer Davies, if that's okay to ask.
Well, we'll hold Councillor Spalding, hold that thought in mind for him for when we get to his section. But perhaps if Constable Davies could turn his attention to that question now, please.
Yes. In response, I would say that this application is in perpetuity. So hence the consideration for the COVID legislation and for definite in relation to the amendments as of the last 24 hours is at a minimum 6 months subject to government change, and obviously up to 12 months. So one would argue, if the committee were minded, in a balance and on consideration of the mention of 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, to be, how can I say, pragmatic in a view to kind of balance the business need and also the residents' needs. Hence, post within a year, I dare say we'll be able to kind of understand a little bit better how the performance of businesses have been post this unprecedented time. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I think I do, Officer. Thank you for that. So obviously there's been instances in the past where we've looked at exceptional reasons, and COVID would certainly be a new track that we're considering. Are you saying, therefore, that the COVID legislation we should regard as as some kind of exceptional circumstance when considering all of that in terms of its impact on business? Or would you see noise and nuisance as is in the as is in the legislation to be overriding and overarching?
Under licensing objectives, obviously business and financial gain, how I understand it, is not one of those considerations, and I think it's a fine balance between the essence of the license in perpetuity and the time frame of the COVID. In all best circumstances, if the COVID wasn't here, would be granting the license beyond our midnight policy. I think that would be the question. So again, to throw it back to the committee, we'd be guided by the committee on that one.
Thank you, Officer. That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Councillor Blakeman.
Yes, it was just a concern that Constable Davies's objections seem to be rather speculative rather than based in fact, although I do accept that more deliveries will bring more deliverers into the area, but whether they will then create noise and nuisance is a different issue. And of course, if they did create a lot of excessive noise and nuisance, then that could be the subject of a review rather than an objection to the licence as requested.
So, Constable Davis, what do you say to that point of view?
I think the concern, and it's a very generic concern under the prevention aspect, is and I think Mr. Ronnie has identified the issue of controlling the delivery drivers, whether on their mobile phones or vehicles turning up, screeching brakes, parking, the general nuisance perspective, whether they're going to be hanging around corners, whether they're going to be inside the premises, and kind of tidying that aspect up. But obviously there's not been significant levels of proof of management of that kind of style of business at that location, and it would be quite a kind of a precedented or unique position for a premises down on Earls Court Road.
Yeah, so it does remain speculative rather than factual.
Yes, it's an opinion, Chair.
Chairman, may I ask a follow-on to Councillor Blakeman's question?
Yes, if she's finished, I'll bring you back in again, Councillor Mills.
Yes, I'm finished, thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Mills, then please.
Yes, thank you. So you said in your report that in your view, the premises is operating at an optimum for this locality or this location, and I was unsure what you meant by that. Is that, as Councillor Blakeman has just said, more of an opinion than a fact, or what do you mean by operating at an optimum?
As far as the times that it's operating at.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
It was in reference to the time, so the 12 o'clock, 11:30.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that, officer.
Thanks very much, and that's covered my question. So, Ms. Lemazurier, anything from you that you'd like to ask?
Not at this stage, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. So, Mr. Shawani, do you have any questions for Constable Davis?
No questions at all.
Thanks very much.
At all the points.
Thank you. And I'll ask Mr. Richardson if you have any questions.
No, I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Spalding, any questions from you?
No questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. In which case, I'll move on to Mr. Richardson. You have up to 12 minutes to present your case, and then there'll be some questions for you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Good morning, everyone. I haven't got much to add to my objection on the 11th of February. We can see on the screen. The only thing I would add is since then there has been a significant problem with delivery drivers from sort of all three significant delivery companies, Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eat. There was a project taking place specifically with Deliveroo in that area because there was a significant problem at the top of Child's Place, I believe it was, and Child's Street, with as a result of the drivers congregating, blocking the road, causing problems, leaving rubbish, litter, all that sort of raft of problems you would get with a group of people congregating. Unfortunately, I dipped out of that project because I was dealing with something else at the time. I couldn't commit to it, so I'm not entirely sure where it went to. I know Councillor Wade was heavily involved in it. It was her. So it was sort of something she brought to the table. I don't know whether Councillor Spalding's been involved in it or not, and obviously the other ward councillor. As a result of that, specific parking bays had been marked out by our highways team in a different location for these drivers to park in, and it did, by all accounts, improve slightly. The caveat I'll put on this was that did occur more daytime hours rather than nighttime hours, which is what this sort of application relates to. Obviously, I know the applicant has agreed to the conditions I proposed, and I think part of that would be that in that sort of delivery sort of schedule that they would have to identify a location for these drivers to go to, which would obviously keep them away from residential streets. Obviously, there is a significant problem with delivery drivers, and as PC Davis hinted on with the change in the COVID legislation, I can only see deliveries becoming more and more prevalent in the area. I know personally, on a personal note, I've used takeaway delivery services a lot more during sort of the lockdown in the past 6 months than I ever have previously. And the only other thing I would like to add is obviously I welcome the applicant's willingness to reduce the hours. And similar to PC Davis, I'd leave that with the committee to decide the balance between 1 and 2 as to what would best suit the residents and the location, obviously taken into the business, the account of the business and the needs. But obviously I welcome that reduction. I know the licensing policy says midnight, and that's what they're operating at the moment. But obviously there are exceptions, and these are hard times, and I understand and appreciate that the business needs to make some money. I don't think I've got anything else to add other than to add that about the significant delivery problem we've had.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richardson. I'll turn to my colleagues to ask you questions, starting with Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Richardson, help me with the view of the local authority noise and nuisance department. I'm not understanding that there is any background policy discussion of what I'd call of a bureaucratic kind to actually allow the committee to find COVID an exception to the midnight policy. So is that what you are suggesting, that let's say a 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock you would be happy to accept because somehow or the other COVID was now an exception? I'm slightly not getting that point.
In relation to the sort of the exceptions to the licensing policy, to be honest, I don't know exactly how that would work. I think it would maybe best directed to the legal officer or one of the licensing officers. Obviously, my concern in this application was 3 a.m. That is very late for the area. There's not, other than Stark above, as mentioned earlier, was 2 a.m. I personally felt 3 a.m. was too late for the location. As it's in my objections, I mentioned midnight as the license statement of licensing policy, but I understand Mr. Shawani's got a business to run, he needs to make money. If the licensing committee decide to go against the policy and say 1 or even 2, then personally, for me, 1 o'clock would be what I would suggest, because this is a completely new late night opening for them, and if there's nothing to say in the future if they operate to 1 o'clock and there's no problems, they can't come back with another variation to ask for 2 o'clock, and we can discuss that at that time. But yeah, to answer the question, to go against the policy, I don't know, maybe that should be directed to the licensing officers or to the legal officer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richardson, because you would take the point that the committee, even though it has to deal with all applications in their own right, also has to be consistent. And therefore, if we were to find COVID an exception today without consultation with ward councillors or anybody, let alone the lead members, the cabinet members, then effectively you could have 31 premises in Earl's Court applying for COVID as an exception to the midnight policy rule. So I would just like to take away from what you said that in fact there is no formal procedure that mandates this committee to look at COVID as an exception to the midnight policy at this point in time.
As far as noise and nuisance are concerned, there isn't any policy for that. But in relation to the Licensing Act, I think I'd have to send you to my colleagues in licensing or legal. No, I don't know. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. I think I'm taking away with the leave of the chairman and Councillor Blakeman that I am not aware as a councillor that there has been any formal discussion or policy around COVID as an exception to the midnight policy at this point in time. So therefore, what we need to do, outstanding sympathy to businesses is achieve some kind of statutory and authority, and therefore, until such time, we should assume that the midnight policy and the exceptionality around the midnight policy is what we should be considering. What do you think about that, Chairman?
Thank you, Councillor Mills. I'm going to bring in, because they've put their electronic hands up, I'll bring in the licensing officer, Mr. Phelan, first, and then Constable Davis. So, Mr. Phelan, you have a point to make on this.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify the position regarding the midnight policy and COVID. There hasn't been an exception in the policy with regards to the COVID. So Councillor Mills is correct in her assessment of the situation. I just thought it best to clarify that from licensing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phelan. Constable Davis, your electronic hand is up.
Yes, Chair. There has been widespread support in relation to from City Hall and the government in supporting businesses. That is the only understanding where it obviously sees fit that I understand as the major kind of implication of COVID, if that assists Councillor Mills.
We will note that, but of course we are the Borough Council, not City Hall here. But thank you very much for that intervention. And Councillor Mills, do you have any further questions for Mr. Richardson?
No, thank you, Chairman. I'm very grateful for the responses and also for Mr. Phelan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Blakeman.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Mr. Richardson, you say in your evidence that the premises advertises as an American-style burger joint, but when I asked Mr. Shawani, he said it was grilled Lebanese food. So which is correct?
At the time of writing that objection, that is what was advertised via the website on the internet. If that's changed since then, that might be the case, but at the time I wrote that objection, that is what was advertised on their website.
Okay. And my second question is that if a problem did emerge because of the Deliveroo and whatever drivers blocking the place, would it be possible to have a similar project as that which was put in place at Child's Place?
I guess yes, it would be possible. We'd have to obviously identify the problem and bring in the various different council departments that have dealt with it, like the highways and community safety and things like that. One thing I'd add is that the Deliveroo, especially because they led on the first project, have been very good with the drivers, and we do now have a link to direct into Deliveroo if there are problems, which is sort of like a direct council link, and they can take, with evidence, they can take action against the drivers. But obviously, although the drivers sign up to this charter, as they say, from experience, they don't always stick to it, which is why we've had to bring in this project. But yes, if it was a problem, it is something that could be looked at. It's not a problem. Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, thank you. That's reassuring.
Thank you, Councillor Blakeman. My only question, just to summarise my understanding of your position, Mr. Richardson, you're opposing the 3 AM application, but you are quite sympathetic, or you're coming across as quite sympathetic to the applicant, and it seems to me that your sympathy is becoming more pronounced the earlier we, or the further back we put the time. So you'd be a little bit sympathetic to 0200, and you'd be even more sympathetic to 0100. Is that right?
Yes, I guess you could look at that. Obviously, midnight would be the ideal in line with policy, but obviously, if you were minded to go against policy, as close to midnight as possible would be better. Obviously, Earls Court Road is fairly busy still at 1 o'clock, so the background noise is still there. So the earlier the better, on my view, on a noise point of view, because of the background noise masking the noise of the drivers and things like that. But ideally, midnight would be best for us. But obviously, I take into account the applicant's statements earlier about the business needs.
Right, so you're actually arguing for midnight for the policy, but you would perhaps accept a later time, but not so late as 3 a.m.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, I see Councillor Mills's microphone is on. Does that mean she has a question, a follow-up?
Yeah, just a final one, if I may, for Mr. Richardson. Looking at the conditions, existing conditions on the licence, so the training conditions, the dedicated telephone numbers, are you aware or have you inspected the books at the premises or seen any evidence of the training or whether or not that telephone number has been manned and the complaints coming through to it?
No, I've personally not had the need to.
But it's, remember, Mr. Richardson, you speak for the licensing department. It's not. It's not about personal views here. It's about the licensing.
Well,
has the licensing department had an inspection of the records or the training, or whether there have been complaints through the dedicated book or telephone number?
Well, speaking on behalf of the noise and nuisance team, we haven't had the need to. We haven't received any complaints that would warrant to inspect it. I don't know whether the licensing department have refer you to Mr. Phelan on that one, but as a noise and nuisance perspective, we have had no need to, because we haven't to date received any complaints in the last 12 months that would warrant going down there to have a look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. So perhaps this, Chairman, if you think it's appropriate, it's a question for Mr. Phelan to see if under condition 10, 13, 24, whether there has been a visit from the licensing authority to see that those conditions have been complied with.
And Mr. Phelan's hand went up there, so I'll bring Mr. Phelan in at this stage to see if he wishes to make a comment to that.
Certainly, I just wanted to clarify that on the 28th of the 2nd, 2019, there was a visit by a licensing officer. He was accompanied by Mr. Sawani. Training records and inspection logs were all satisfactory at the time of visit, and the consequence of that was that it was considered low risk. So the next visit essentially is due, according to our system, in 2024, but that may be revised. I'll have to check that to be certain, but it's a low risk. So there were no issues noted by the officer when he visited.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the questions from the panel. I'll turn to Ms. Le Mesurier to see if she has any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll wait till all the objectors have spoken, and then before you close, I'll raise any condition type questions, but I don't have any questions myself. Thank you.
Of course, right. I'm going to carry on asking just in case something occurs to you immediately. So let me turn to Constable Davis. Do you have any questions for Mr. Richardson?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Shawani, as the applicant, do you have any questions for Mr. Richardson?
No questions at all, Chair.
Thanks very much. Councillor Spalding, for the objectors, any questions for Mr. Richardson?
One brief question, Chairman, thank you. On page 30 on the screen of Mr. Richardson's report, I think it's one page back. Down at the bottom of that page, the last but one paragraph. This paragraph, the last but one. Mr. Richardson, you say, despite there being a loading bay on Earls Court Road, there could be issues with patrons being displaced, and also, of course, the Deliveroo, Uber and Just Eat. The question is, do you accept this being a very mixed area, with Earls Court Road being a very busy road, but all the side streets being very quiet residential streets, given that TfL have suspended most of the loading bays and in fact have put barricades all down the pavements as part of their social distancing measures, that there is no place for either customers or for motorcycles, Deliveroo, etc. There is nowhere for them to park on Earls Court Road, and so that actually, due to the present situation, there'll be far more displacement into the residential side streets, and therefore your objection about creating noise nuisance is actually exacerbated quite a lot.
Yes, in the short answer would be yes, I'd agree with that. Obviously, that when I wrote that back in, wrote that in February, I believe it was, obviously none of these social distance measures were in place then. And being completely honest, I've only been to the office twice since March, and I haven't taken in a huge amount of notice of what has been done on Earls Court Road. I obviously have noticed the barriers have been in place. I haven't noticed that the loading bays have been taken out of action as such. But yes, if there are no loading bays, the road has been narrowed, pavements have been made wider. There is no way for these delivery drivers, whether it be cars or motorbikes or even pedal bikes, to wait on Earls Court Road anymore, and therefore they will be displaced into sort of the surrounding streets, in particular probably Nevin Place, in relation to where this applicant is. Nevin Place and even Childs Street and Childs Place, if I remember rightly from memory, they would be the closest residential roads, and yes, they will be displaced into there, and it will exacerbate the problem, especially if you get, say, a group of 3 or more drivers waiting, chatting, talking on the phones as such.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spalding. Councillor Blakeman has a supplementary question.
Yes, I was wondering if you turn to page 72, you can point out to us where the road has been narrowed and where the barriers have been placed.
Was that a question for Mr.
Sorry,
Richardson?
I think that's a question for Councillor Spalding, because Mr. Richardson said he hadn't seen it, so I'll defer it till
yes,
then.
let's hold that point till after we've heard Councillor Spalding's case, because we've got one each from both you and Councillor Mills now for him to address. So, Mr. Richardson, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for your presenting your case. We're now turning to Councillor Spalding to present the case for the objection, and you have up to 12 minutes to do so. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a plan actually somewhere, and I'm looking for it, and I will try to find it to actually specifically locate these barriers. But my point is this. Clearly the business model of Jimmy's Grill restaurant has changed, and it's changed from being a restaurant and contracted, which clearly means that the extent of the deliveries will grow. In fact, I think the applicant has admitted that, and it's been brought out by the questions from the panel, that the business model has changed to one of takeaway deliveries. Now, we know that TfL have introduced all these restrictions down Earls Court Road, and so basically there will be less space in the trading streets for these delivery riders and motorbikes to park. Now, Mr. Richardson referred to a project in Childs Place, but in fact last year in Kenway Road at the Sichuan Chef, Councillor Dorian and I actually managed to get hold of the managing director of Deliveroo, who came down to Earls Court and met the restaurant, and we talked it through. And basically the position is Deliveroo will act if residents take photographs of the number plates of the motorbikes loitering or riding on pavements or causing nuisance with cigarette ends and rubbish and talking, revving engines and so on, blocking roads, blocking pavements. There's a whole raft of problems that Deliveroo riders have brought to Earls Court. So we have ongoing cases in Kenway Road. We also now have cases in Trebovia Road with Nando's having a huge delivery business on the corner of that street. We also have the case in Hogarth Road, and we have the case that Councillor Wade dealt with, which Mr. Richardson referred to, in Childs Place and Childs Street. So this will yet be another iteration of bringing these delivery drivers into Earls Court. And in general, the council is not on top of this problem and needs to be. Both licensing and nuisance and highways needs to seriously think how we're going to control this phenomenon. At 3 a.m, I would ask, who are the customers? They are not local people. You can see from the spread of objectors that none of them actually would use this type of service. Certainly they might want to buy a hamburger before midnight, but I don't think anybody locally, who are all working population, long-term residential, would be using any of these delivery services. So it's a blight on the area. Earls Court Road is bad enough at the moment. We're down to one lane when a bus stops anywhere or an HGV delivers anywhere, and these tailbacks go up to the high street, in fact. So I think there will be significant displacement to residential side streets, and these are people who are not customers of these premises, who are entitled to a quiet enjoyment of their street. It is a very mixed area in terms of residential and commercial. I think the applicant had great foresight in January. So he would have been very useful to the government if he knew we were going to have a pandemic in January, and that was influenced his business model. Perhaps he can join the cabinet or join SAGE, because he might be a bit more helpful to the whole country. If he, in January, when he did this application, he had a 3 a.m. In mind, because he knew there was going to be a pandemic. He did volunteer, however, to be serious and to be fair, that he would accept 1 a.m. And of course, our policy, if we look at page, it's 26 in my bundle. It's Mr. Davis's report. It's on that page, paragraph 8.10 does refer to the midnight policy and saying that these areas, are residential, and that's why we have this midnight policy. I think in general then, my objection and the objection of residents is not these premises operating until 12. There isn't much history of complaint recently because they haven't been open for 6 months. So I see no exceptional reasons why they should be allowed to go past midnight in view of the serious nuisance that will be created in the residential side streets. And that's basically, Chairman, if Mr. Shawani can accept midnight, which is our borough policy, I think he'll get lots of support from residents. It's a pity he hasn't thought to consult anybody in advance if he wants customers from the local population. And as he says, he's very sensitive to noise and nuisance in residential areas. It would have helped if he had talked to us, and we probably would have supported him if he had applied for 12. At a push, maybe the residents with some reservations for an experimental period might accept 1 a.m, but I think it should be 12. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spalding. I'll start with Councillor Mills to ask questions.
2 questions, if I may. One was the previous question, Councillor Spalding, as to how are residents feeling about supporting businesses in the area in the COVID period, 1, and 2, do you think therefore they might want the benefit of more takeaway, as people are saying they're using takeaway services more? But the other question I have from what you said is Nando's. You said you'd had a lot of trouble with Nando's. At least I think that's what was said. But I noticed that Nando's only is licensed up to midnight in the bundle. So does that mean that prior to midnight you've been experiencing difficulties with Nando's and other takeaways in the area? Thank you.
Yes. Councillor Mills, you're absolutely right. Nando's have a conglomeration of delivery motorbikes. There's never less than 20 or 25 of them parked in a huddle on the corner of Trebovia Road and Earls Court Road. And it's difficult enough to turn into that road anyway, if you're a local driver. And I'd probably make that turning once every 2 days. And there are always motorbikes blocking half the road. And you've only got to get there's also a taxi firm there blocking the other side of the road. And it's quite dangerous to turn into that because you have to suddenly stop because there are motorbikes whizzing in and out. And you have to stop right in the middle of Earls Court Road, making a right turn. There's no provision for these delivery drivers anywhere. I mean, they don't pay to use a visitor's parking bay. They can't use residential bays. And so they just litter the streets and they cause hazards and noise and nuisance. So you precisely put your finger on the problem that this premises will bring into these side streets coming off of Earls Court Road.
Councillor Mills, any follow-up?
Well, I mean, I hear what you said earlier about potentially some sympathy for an experiment until beyond the midnight hour in the Earls Court area. But are you suggesting that this experiment should apply to this premises when the committee comes to make its decision, or are you saying that we should adhere to the consulted on midnight policy? What is the general view in Earls Court towards businesses?
Midnight is the thing that we all want, and it's fair and it's equitable between businesses. And basically, if you want to run a takeaway restaurant service, you should run it from a semi-industrial area. You know, you should run it from Park Royal or from a trading estate or from a small industrial estate. We've got those in the borough. You shouldn't run it from the corner of a residential street. If your business model is takeaways, you can operate till 12, for locals, but beyond that, you should follow the borough policy, or you should take your business to somewhere that suits a takeaway business model if it's after midnight.
Thank you, Councillor Spalding. Councillor Mills, are you done there?
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, I hadn't unmuted. Thank you for the answers.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Blakeman, I know you had one already, but over to you.
Yeah, 3 questions. Firstly, with regard to the customers not being local, I think the applicant has already said that they would be predominantly healthcare workers whose shift finishes at 1 a.m. So a midnight closing policy would not suit them. Is that what you're saying? Secondly, are you also saying that it is right that we should penalise these premises because of poor behaviour by other premises? And thirdly, my question relates to page 72. I wonder if you can show us where the TfL barriers actually go.
First question, I believe was about the customers, the customer base. As far as I'm aware, Chelsea Westminster has very adequate canteen facilities for its staff, and they're about a mile and a half away in Fulham Road. And I don't see any staff coming up to these premises, and I'm not sure that deliveries take place from these premises down to the Chelsea Westminster NHS Hospital, which has lots of premises in Fulham Road and very good canteen facilities for their staff. The Cromwell, there may be 1 or 2 customers, but I'm not sure that they have shifts that end at either 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. I think that needs to be teased out. The Cromwell Hospital is very small anyway, and there are premises, for instance, in Gloucester Road, which are probably nearer where people could get food to a late hour. When you say this premises, your first question shouldn't be penalised because of other premises, I didn't actually say that. It's not that there are other companies doing takeaways. It's the same companies who are doing the deliveries. It's Deliveroo, Uber and Just Eat. And those are the companies who are causing the problem. And they are common to all of these businesses. So I'm not penalising this one business. What we're after is the problem, and I've said the borough doesn't have a grip on this. We don't have a grip on Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Just Eat and other delivery companies. I mean, ask any resident about delivery, motorbikes and mopeds, especially vulnerable pedestrians and drivers, and you'll have a litany of horror stories about these motorbikes and mopeds. And your third question, I still can't locate the plan from TfL. I'm looking for it, but certainly the amount of spaces where you can park in Earls Court Road legally have been vastly reduced. And we're down to 1 lane in places. But these motorbikes don't park legally. They hang about in residential streets, talking, smoking, chatting, drinking from cans. I don't know what they drink, and parking on the pavements and littering and causing noise and motorbike noise late at night in residential streets. That's indisputable. And the fact that about 1/3 of Earls Court Road has been sectioned off means there's bound to be displacement.
So you're not convinced by Mr. Shawani's statement that he will actually try and deal with those problems?
Well, he can't. I mean, he actually admitted he has no control over Uber and Just Eat and Deliveroo, because they're just completely separate companies, and he has no control over them. But he's bringing more into the area until 3 a.m. And that's what I'm fighting for my residents, for their peace at night. I mean, if you would like to have a crowd of motorcyclists outside your bedroom window between midnight and 3 a.m, well, be the first volunteer. But my residents don't want it.
It happens now.
So, Councillor Blakeman, any more questions from you? And I see Councillor Mills wants to come back in. Nothing more from Councillor Blakeman. So, Councillor Mills.
Councillor Spalding, you said that you achieved the miraculous by getting the top man, a Deliveroo, to come down to you, and that the way they would control the things would be if the residents would take license plate numbers and then they could deal with it. And you also said that, of course, the local authority has not got a grip on the delivery routes, if you like, or delivery carriers, and neither has TfL. So did residents, or are residents presently taking license plate readings and photographs and reporting them back to Deliveroo so you can begin to control this problem?
Well, I haven't monitored that, Councillor Mills. We got this verbal undertaking from the MD that if we took a photograph, or residents took a photograph of a delivery driver's number plates and the offence taking place, they would terminate their contract with that particular individual. Now, I think that's a very good question. I think it needs monitoring and following up. And I think it needs a borough approach. I mean, I can do it as a ward councillor, as an individual, but I suppose my worry is that the borough hasn't got its head round this problem yet, and it should be done on a formal basis by officers. but I can certainly follow it up, but I don't have that data for you today.
Thanks. I'm going to bring Mr. Richardson in as he's put his hand up, and I think we can have the electronic hands down from Councillor Mills and Councillor Blakeman as well while we're at it. Mr. Richardson.
Yes, just on that point, in relation to the photographs, I have personally forwarded residents' photographs with the number plates of the vehicles causing problems in Child's Place to Deliveroo. I don't at this stage know what action was taken by Deliveroo, but we have been, when they've been sent to me personally, I have been sending them through to Deliveroo, and that was part of the project in Child's Place before I sort of had to dip out of it to deal with another project. But yes, we have been sending them through when they have come to us.
Thanks very much, Mr. Richardson. I'll just pause to see if either Councillor Blakeman or Councillor Mills has anything further to ask.
So may I conclude from, or may we conclude from that, Mr. Richardson, that there have been issues where residents have actually felt the need to go out and take photographs of contraventions, and if so, are you able to remember, and no need to if you can't, how many and at what hour there were, and if possible, was it around? Obviously, was it actually around the Child's Place and Child's Street locations?
So the photographs I referred to were specifically relating to the top of Child's Place. If you see on the plan on the screen at the moment, around about where 145 and 147 Earls Court Road is, the bikes there blocking the road for residents getting in and out. And on that plan, especially down at the very bottom of Child's Place where it says 14 to 15, the drivers would go down there to eat their own lunch and leave rubbish. I think that's a sort of a commercial office building that's up for sale at the moment, and they would go down there, sit on the steps and just leave their rubbish and cigarette ends and things like that down there. That I believe those drivers were mainly in relation to Jollibee at 180, and that was mainly during the daylight hours. But the residents have been out and taken the photographs, sent them through to myself and Councillor Wade, and I have sent them through to Deliveroo. But as I said earlier, I had to sort of dip out of that project because I had to deal with something else. So I don't know whatever happened to them in the end. But yes, specifically Child's Place, it has happened.
Okay, thanks. I want to bring this back to questions to Councillor Spalding now. And if there's nothing else from the panel members, Ms. Le Mesurier.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Councillor Spalding, you mentioned the possibility of an experimental or time-limited licence. How long would you consider that should last for if the committee were minded to go down that route?
Well, I'm offering that as a kind of backstop, and I would think probably 1 year would be a fair period to monitor and let the council get a bit more up to speed on the problem of delivery motorbikes. But I can't see where they would park legally. I don't know where all these delivery motorbikes are going to go. As I said, I don't think Earls Court Road is a suitable venue for takeaway deliveries. I think that should be confined to a more industrial area, and not. I mean, this is the most densely populated residential place in Europe of low rise, and all those hundreds of residents are going to be disturbed by motorbikes who have nowhere legally where they can park. So I don't know, if you're going to give him an experimental period, somebody's got to get hold of the fact that ask where are all these motorbikes going to park.
So just to recap, your preference would be midnight, but as a backstop, a year's licence, and I think you said 1 o'clock when you mentioned earlier. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we'll turn to the applicant, Mr. Shawani. Do you have any questions for Councillor Spalding?
Just one question. Would you accept that there are many restaurants and takeaways in the Earls Court area which trade up to 0030 hours with takeaways?
Well, we've got the list in the back of the pack, and I have to admit I haven't counted the ones who go to midnight 30, but there are quite a few.
Yes.
I haven't got the exact number, but they all share this common problem of having nowhere for their motorbikes to park, and the motorbikes causing problems wherever they appear. So the commonality of this, it's all the ones that do go to midnight 30 are causing these problems currently. And it's something that in general needs to be addressed, not just you, but these motorbikes don't have a legal place to park anywhere. And so I don't see how the business model can operate or will continue to operate in future, especially given our midnight policy.
And would you accept that there are at least two premises which are trading up to 0200 hours with takeaways?
Could you point those out to me?
Star Kebab House, Georgina's Pizza.
Yeah, Giorgio's, I have no worries about. Star Kebab, I do have worries. They don't keep the pavements clean. There's often ASB around that premises. I know the operators very well. I visit them frequently, and I'm trying to get improvements to their premises. And of course, we're getting motorbikes congregating in Nevern Place, as well as in Trebovia Road for Nando's. So the problem of all of these late night cafes is proliferating the problem of motorbikes. And I don't think Earls Court Road in general is a suitable place for any kind of takeaway business, especially after midnight.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Shawani. So just turning to the responsible authorities in turn for questions. Constable Davis.
No further questions from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Richardson, any questions?
No further questions from me. Thank you.
Okay, just coming back to the panel members to give them a last chance to ask questions of Councillor Spalding.
Not from me. Not for me.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Spalding, for your making your case and for answering the questions. You can turn your camera and microphone off. We won't have any summing up. So now time to hear from the legal officer, please, on any advice and any comments on conditions.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've already discussed or Mr. Shawani has already agreed to the three proposed conditions by noise and nuisance, like the delivery service and the waste patrols. I think I would just probably tweak one of the conditions about list patrols, just saying that a responsible member of staff shall carry out proactive controls at least twice during daylight, 3 times during darkness, throughout trading hours, and to ensure there's no litter outside at the end nor within 200 metres of the premises, and any litter shall be collected and returned for disposal within the premises. So we've got, if the committee were minded to grant, we've got those 3 possible conditions. I think I'd add one more condition if you were minded to grant, and I just wanted to check that Mr. Shawani was okay with this. The pavement from the building line to the curb edge immediately outside the premises, including the gutter stroke channel at its junction with the curb, shall be swept and washed, and litter and sweeping collected and stored in accordance with the refuse arrangements. I just wondered if he was okay with all those 4 conditions.
Mr. Shawani?
Yes, that's fine. Absolutely right.
And can I just ask Mr. Shawani what his view is on if the committee were minded to go for a time limited licence till 1 o'clock for 1 year?
My personal view is 1 o'clock for a limited time period, as the councillor said, for probably 12 months would probably be right. And then we could see how the land lies after that. But I think that's a very timely proposition. Okay,
so just to be clear, if the committee were minded, obviously they don't have to do it time limited. They can do it untime limited. You wouldn't object to a 12-month license up till 1 a.m. plus those 4 conditions.
That's correct.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Chairman.
Thanks very much. I will ask for any comments from the licensing officer finally.
No, thank you, Chair. No further comments. Thank you.
Okay, well, in which case we will adjourn at this point to consider our decision. We're not going to reconvene to announce it today, so governance will notify all parties of the decision within 5 clear working days, and the full minutes will follow much later. So I'd like to thank all parties for your representations today. The hearing is now closed and the live stream broadcast will end. Panel members will meet in the retiring room at 5:12. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.